This is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and today we have a very special episode. This episode is going to be inspired by the book Six Pillars to Self-Esteem by Nathanial Branden. And today I'm here with Fern Schumer Chapman, author of Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, Sibling Estrangement, and the Road to Reconciliation. Thank you so much for being here, Fern.
It's always great to be with you, Ali John. Thanks for having me. And self-esteem is a very key component of sibling estrangement. And actually, last time we were together, we talked about enabling. And at the core of enabling is this sense of low self-esteem, because there's this feeling that if my own brother or own sister doesn't want anything to do with me, then who will? So I think we have a tendency to enable because we want to ingratiate ourselves to that powerful sibling. It doesn't necessarily work at all, but it comes from a low sense of self-esteem.
You're absolutely right. I think that we oftentimes don't always see things clearly in terms of just what impact our sibling relationship or lack thereof can have on us. So today I think that it's really important to let our viewers know that this is going to be part of a series, and we're going to be getting into some of the 6 tenets on self-esteem. As a matter of fact, because I think that Nathanial Branden's work is just so important because he's done a lot of research on this particular topic, and I think it's again something that a lot of people going through sibling estrangement issues are very familiar with. And I think that the conversations are very thriving on the Facebook page, Sibling Estrangement, Sharing, Coping, Connecting, with regards to this. So, you know, when we don't have a good self-esteem, we often feel depleted, bewildered, doubtful of ourselves. And that can be oftentimes due to what our siblings said about us or did to us. And, you know, I think that it's really important to recognize that we can re-empower ourselves when it comes to our self-esteem issues. And today we're going to be talking about the first 2 of the 6 tenets of self-esteem. The first 2 we're going to be doing today is going to be about living consciously and practicing self-acceptance. So those are going to be the 2 first ones we'll do, and the other ones we'll be doing in upcoming episodes are practicing self-responsibility, practicing self-assertiveness, living a goal-oriented life, and practicing personal integrity.
So I want to say a couple things here, and one is that if you've had a bullying sibling in childhood, that really can set this low self-esteem up in it. And then you end up on this very dangerous cycle of trying to earn that bully's affection or whatever. And it just makes this self-esteem lower and lower and lower. And that's a really dangerous path. But the other thing I wanted to say is, you know, we often talk about sibling estrangement and what it really means to the individual. And it means so much more than simply not speaking to your sibling, your brother or sister. It ripples throughout a life, and it affects how you see yourself and your friendships and your social relationships, your well-being, your ability to trust, and even of family relationships, because as we know, people take sides.
Absolutely. And that's one of the issues I find that is especially important for us to highlight. It's the idea that this affects us on different levels, and that it affects our relationships with other people and our outlook on life. So let's get into the first tenet. I think that that's really important in terms of living consciously. Living consciously simply means recognizing and maintaining a level of awareness with regards to our actions, values, goals, and purposes. And as best as we can, however that ability manifests, and to act accordingly with what we see and know. So that's really what's important in all this with regards to living consciously. It's really about recognizing what's going on inside of us, but also what's happening outside of us and being able to learn from that.
I mean, one of the problems is people with low self-esteem often don't know themselves very well.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, that's an interesting point, because I think that when people don't know themselves well, what happens is that they're selective in terms of the information they may be receiving, they may be taking in. There might be certain things that we avoid, for example, with regards to our relationship with our sibling, or with regards to ourselves. And sometimes avoidance is a good thing. But at the same time, what ends up happening is that it can sometimes be a bad thing, in the sense that it becomes overused and it prevents us from doing certain things, and properly living fully in our own nature and such.
But the other problem with it, Ollie John, is that when you have low self-esteem, you sometimes see the world through a very negative view. And so you interpret a lot of what's happening around you to be an affront or an insult. So
Yep.
it's hard to get clear thinking on this.
You're absolutely right. And I think that that's the thing that happens with a lot of us, is that we tend to confuse our emotions, and we end up interpreting certain things based on that. It's basically, instead of taking in all of the information, as I said, we're selective. We let the emotion be the deciding factor for us. If something makes us feel uncomfortable, for example, then what ends up happening is that we take that at face value, instead of perhaps looking at the facts, looking at the idea that it might not necessarily be about us. But there is a certain sense of personalization that happens with a lot of what we see or what we feel. So it becomes very important to sometimes question our interpretations. Ask ourselves, are we looking at the situation, or in a just manner, or are we basically just letting it go through our own filters, and then coming up with some sort of message that basically just reduces us or depletes us, or, as we said earlier, makes us doubt of ourselves?
It's really challenging. And I remember reading some research about those people who have been abused. They look at faces, and when there is no negative intent there, they interpret that negativity. So in other words, somebody may be making a raised eyebrow, and they interpret it as something very judgmental.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that happens. Basically, you take that, oh, their eyebrows raised. There must be something about what we've said or done in some ways that causes us to feel uncomfortable. So they're judging me. They're making me feel a certain way. So again, you can see just at which point the interpretations take us in a whole different direction. So one of the things that's important in all this is to notice and confront our impulses, to avoid or deny painful or threatening realities. I think that that's really important as well, because it's if we're not careful, then we can fall into patterns of unconsciousness. So I think that that's really what's important here, is just to recognize that there can be certain patterns of unconsciousness that can play themselves out with regards to, say, family meetings, family get-togethers, where we end up regressing in some ways. So just being conscious of that, and that's the effort. It does take an effort for us to show up, to be present in how we feel, and that's really what living consciously is all about.
Yeah, those family gatherings are a real slippery slope because they set you up for not only encountering your difficult or toxic sibling, but they also force you to, in some ways, or make you in some ways, regress.
They do, and that's the thing that's important with regards to that. And another good way to live consciously is to simply be concerned to know if my actions are in alignment with my purpose. And that's another thing that's really important, because oftentimes, if we're not careful, we can tend to dwell or ruminate on what certain people might say, as opposed to maintaining and living our goals. So one of the things that's associated to that is basically just the idea of, just basically casting aside what's important for us. So if, for example, what's important for us is to be strong, for example, then it can mean to take a course of action. That means to be firm. And once that choice is made, then that's it. You don't need to dwell on it and look at it 1,001 different ways. If you've made that decision, then that's what it is. So after that, what becomes important is that you be gentle towards yourself. So that's the thing that we often don't do.
And that's where that negative voice is so dangerous. I think it's called automated negative thoughts, which are also known as ants. And it's this idea that people think that they don't understand that they actually control that voice. They think that there's some larger force that's putting those thoughts in your head. But you actually have to challenge those negative thoughts. And it's not an easy thing to do, especially
Yeah,
when you have low self-esteem.
absolutely. And that's the thing that's important here with regards to that, is always to take the feedback that we have from our environment to be able to correct our course of action when necessary, because pilots do this all the time too, right? They always get like some feedback to say if they're on course or not, right? So that's what's really important, is to kind of look at that environmental feedback to see if things have changed or not, and to not always necessarily go with the same strategy, because anger can be useful for us because it's a justification of something that happened that wasn't fair, and that's important, just to simplify. And what happens with anger is that if we're not careful, it can pour into other relationships. We can become rigid with other people. We can miss out on a certain emotional vulnerability that can open us up to have potentially new friends and things of that nature. So I think that's really important to keep that in mind.
Well, let me ask you this then. Is it easy for those with low self-esteem to actually access their anger?
I think that what happens with them is that anger is turned towards them. That's the thing that
Yeah,
happens.
so it's towards themselves.
Yes, exactly. So your emotions are playing against yourself, and you're, instead of using it for informational purposes, oh, I'm feeling this. What's this mean? How does this apply to this situation? There's less of that and more of the idea of using that intensity against ourselves. So it's basically using that narrative to put ourselves down. So it's important to work with that intensity, and it's important to go into some of those places that are uncomfortable. So it's another thing the author speaks about is about living consciously. If my consciousness is used for everything except self understanding. So it's very important that we use that consciousness to better ourselves and get to know ourselves. So that way, our internal reality is respected, and that we're not strangers unto ourselves. And I was reading the book, and there was something called self-estrangement, and I thought that was a great term, as that's exactly what can happen if you have low self-esteem. You can end up being a stranger unto yourself.
Wow. Well, I
Mhm.
can see that. I mean, it's, this gets back to some of what we've talked about in the past, which is the importance of watching yourself and the third eye, and how you react in certain situations.
Yep.
And that is how you battle self-estrangement.
Exactly. Absolutely. So that's what's really important in all of this, is that notion of getting to know yourself, but also being aware of the values that move and guide you, as well as recognizing that we're not ruled by values that are irrational and that are necessarily automatically accepted by other people. It's really important to recognize how we've been conditioned, because that's something that we forget, is oftentimes we take on certain things, and sometimes it's not even good or healthy for us, but it's the way it's always been done. So it's like we take that on. Oh, okay. No.
Well, and it's like, the people we select to surround ourselves with are our mirrors. And so if we surround ourselves with people who make us feel badly, then you're going to bring that everywhere. Whereas if you actually have stronger, loving relationships, the likelihood of improving self-esteem is much higher.
Absolutely. So it feeds off of itself in that way, right? In that way, you have people that are validating, that are healthy for you, that bring out those good qualities you have. Then yes, it's going to boost us. Yes, it's going to make us better. So there needs to be a balance between, yes, how we feel, our internal reality, but also our external reality, which is very important, like you're saying. Hmm. So So I think that maybe we can get into the second tenet there, Fern, because I know
Mhm.
that I know that it's something that I think our viewers would be interested in.
Okay, go ahead.
And practicing self-acceptance is the second tenet. So what's really important with this is that it's important that we boost self-acceptance, because that has the benefit of strengthening ourselves against self-hatred, against reducing ourselves or giving up the will to live. So recognizing first and foremost the importance of respecting ourselves and asserting that we have a right to exist, you know? So
Mhm.
very important that we have that statement that we have the right to exist. That is key in anything when it comes to self-esteem and our own personal self-image. So um, self-acceptance, I think, is really key here, because it can mean accepting how we think, how we feel, how we desire, recognizing our past actions and who we are. And that can involve our physicality, that can involve our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, and that can mean to avoid rejecting any of these parts. So connecting and experiencing these parts rather than pushing them away can involve owning them when they occur and observe them as they're happening.
And that brings me back to one of the points you so often make, which is you cannot allow your sibling to determine how you see yourself.
Yes, that's exactly right. To give that away to somebody else is taking away your power, you know?
Hmm.
So I think that that's an important aspect. To go into some of these places that can sometimes scare us, or that are unpleasant, I should say, is important for us to look at some of these things rather than avoid them, rather than pretending they're not there. Because what ends up happening is, if we do that, then we end up basically making decisions that can be based out of pain, out of hurt, perhaps out of trauma, and that becomes a trauma response that we've talked about in the previous episode on enabling, you know? So that's what's really important here, is to be brutally honest with yourself in terms of observing what's happening inside of yourself, and to recognize that acceptance is a precursor to any possible change in correcting mistakes from the past. You know, it doesn't mean to condemn, that I can't condemn undesirable actions. It doesn't mean that I'm avoiding responsibility or finding excuses. It just means that I have a compassionate interest in myself, or another person we care for, in order to better understand the dynamic that's at play, especially. Mm.
You know, a lot of times when you and I have talked, I think you've raised this point, and that is that in, you know, we're far less compassionate with ourselves than we are with those we love. We're far more forgiving and willing to tolerate mistakes than we are with our own behaviors.
Yeah,
And it's important sometimes to take the compassion we have for others and bring it direct it inwardly.
absolutely. And there is something that we do offer in terms of the lighthouse technique in one of my videos, that we talk about this particular approach, at self-compassion and such. So that is something that is very interesting. If viewers want to take a look at that, in the solutions and strategies video that I have, I do give a concrete example of how to do that, you know? So I think that, you know, it's important to recognize that with our siblings, we can sometimes feel as if our needs are subjugated, that you know, their dysfunctional behavior caused us to maybe think that sometimes we matter a little. And it's not every family that's able to handle this. You know, sometimes it's the family doesn't really give concrete conflict management examples in some cases. So they say they want peace in families, but yet if there's not any tools to help people to navigate through that, it makes it all that harder to gain a certain sense of self-acceptance. So
Right. It's that whole thing of communication not being modeled in the family, which is a huge risk factor for
mhm,
sibling estrangement.
yeah,
You know, I think too, it's important to recognize that siblings do have an enormous effect on how we see ourselves and our social qualities. They, as children, they teach us things about tolerance and generosity and loyalty. And these things affect other relationships as we get older, but they also can teach us terrible things and hurtful things. And we have to be careful that we don't bring those elements to other relationships too.
Absolutely. And that's the key too. I think that's a good ending point for today, I think, Fern, with regards to that. Just recognizing that our self-esteem, our low self-esteem can have adverse consequences on other areas of our life because we'll be making choices based on that. So if we can get a handle on that and we can raise our self-esteem, then consequently the choices will be better for us.
And sadly, they can be rooted in your sibling relationship, which may be strained or estranged.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that's most important for us, is that all of this starts sometimes as early as in our family of origin, and it carries on sometimes into adulthood, that type of relationship or lack thereof. So if we're not careful and we take that on, then yeah, it could have an adverse effect on us.
So start to view yourself with fresh eyes and challenge those ants, those negative thoughts.
Absolutely. Very much recommended. Fern, thank you so much for doing this. This is wonderful, and I think that before we leave, we should just let our viewers know, of course, about some of the resources that we have. So just so our viewers know, there is a Facebook page called Sibling Estrangement, Sharing, Coping, Connecting that you can be a part of. It's a private page. If you'd like to join us on Facebook, it can help you to meet people of like mind that can have proactive exchanges with you, and basically be a safe place where you can express yourself and continue to empower yourself. You know, of course, there are our videos that we do recommend to people that they can, of course, subscribe. And if they feel the need to share, of course, it's helpful to get the word out, because not many people are talking about sibling estrangement as much. A lot of people talk about narcissism, but not as much about sibling estrangement. And that's what we're doing. We're changing, and we're bringing that conversation to the forefront. And thankfully, the articles you have on Psychology Today are bringing that out in mainstream media.
Thank you. Yes, the psychologytoday.com blog called Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, just like our podcast is called Brothers, Sisters, Strangers. And also, I don't know that you mentioned that we offer these now bi-monthly support groups.
That's right. We do offer the bi-monthly support group on Zoom. So that's it's every 2 weeks. So if people connect to the Sibling Estrangement Facebook page or get in touch with me, I can inform them all about this group. It's an empowering group. It's uplifting. It breaks isolation, and it basically brings people together to talk about this. And of course, there is my website, siblingestrangement.com, that has informative articles on sibling estrangement and how to empower ourselves as well. So.
And one last thought, and that is, if listeners or viewers are struggling with low self-esteem, maybe you would like to ask us some questions in the comments.
Absolutely. Please do reach out if there's any questions you have, dear viewers. We are there to help you to answer them, and hopefully we'll be able to continue in some future episodes on this topic and others concerning sibling estrangement.
Well, there are 4 out of the 6 tenets to go.
That's right. So we hope that you'll be on board with us to hear the rest, of course. So thank you so much, Fern, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Great to be with you. See
you
soon.
Talk soon. Take care. Bye-bye.